Hello and welcome back to my channel. It is the 1st of December and I'm about to start a new book. Now I have been thinking about what bookish goals I still wanted to achieve for the end of the year. Like what was going to be my focus for the last month of the year. I've been structuring my reading around a certain theme each month. Like reading only women in translation for Women in Translation Month. I read only shorties for Shorty September. Last month I played a TBR game. And the only thing I really wanted to do before the year is over is read the next book in Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings series. I started this series back in 2017 and I've been reading 1 or 2 books a year. So moving very slowly through the series. I really love these books and I really want to savor them, but I realized I haven't read any this year, and in fact I read the last book, which was Fool's Fate, I think, the last book in the Tolkien trilogy. I read it back in May of 2023, so it is about time I pick up the next book. So I've been thinking about how can I pick a theme for this month to center my reading around that would bring a kind of a sense of chance and a playfulness to my reading this month, but also will guarantee that I will actually read this book. And I ended up with the idea of just starting at the beginning of my TBR and then see how far I get. Now, for those of you who have been here before, you probably know that this shelf behind me is my TBR shelf. It's where I keep my unread books, and I order them in how long I've had them on my TBR and like on my physical TBR. So these are the books that I've owned the longest, and then they move all the way to here to my most recent acquisitions. And as you might be able to see, The Dragon Keeper by Ruby Hamad is right at the beginning. There's only one book in front of it. So yeah, that is exactly what I will do. I will start reading here and then just keep on going until it's the end of the month, and I will see how far I get. So yeah, the first book I will read is this one, Kwallen, hebben, geen oren by Adèle Rosenfeld. This is a book translated from French, and I did a little research and the English translation actually came out a couple of months ago. It's called Jellyfish Have No Ears. So I have finished Jellyfish Have No Ears by Adèle Rosenfeld. I think, like I said before, it is translated from the French. There's also an English translation, and I'll put the English translator down in the description box as well. It's about a woman named Louise. She is partially deaf, and from what I understand, her deafness is progressive. She is kind of at a crossroads where she needs to decide to get a cochlear implant or not, and it's kind of a now or never situation. A cochlear implant will improve her hearing, but she will lose the ability to hear emotions in tone and just sort of the more nuanced parts of sounds. And this book is, on the one hand, just her basically living her life as a partially deaf person. She starts a new job in this novel, and the book really illustrates well how she deals with that. You know, what challenges she faces when starting a new job. For example, she needs to see a person's mouth and face in a good light to be able to lip read, and even then it can result in some awkward misunderstandings. So you know, when she starts working at the city hall and deals with people who come to register their baby or to do like a notification of birth, I'm not sure what the English term is. She's doing okay when things go according to protocol, and all the forms and all the computers work smoothly. But when they don't, she loses grip on the situation. It's also a very reflective book. She thinks a lot about communication and her relationship to sound and language. One thing she does is to keep an archive of sounds, which she calls her sound herbarium, where she notes down different sounds and what they sound like to her, as a kind of a record to refer back to when she can't hear those sounds anymore. There's also like a more surreal aspect to the book, where the misunderstandings in communication, the misunderstood words will kind of start a life of their own. Sometimes Louise has to fill in so many gaps in her hearing with her own words, guessing what the other person is saying, that she kind of creates this fantasy world where these words come to life and they become part of her world. I don't really know if I'm explaining this in any way that makes sense. Probably because throughout the book I never really got it. I think I see what the author tried to do with it, but I'm not sure she succeeded. I think the book did very well in showing me what it is like for someone who is partially deaf. You can definitely see that the author writes from her own experience, and the book was very enlightening to me in telling me what the auditory experience of the main character was and what kind of struggles she faced, what her dilemmas were and what things were on her mind. But I feel like I would have appreciated that just as much if she wrote essays or memoir. I feel like as a novel this book was lacking. I think it was too single-mindedly focused on the story arc, the question of whether or not to get a cochlear implant. It was very single-mindedly focused on that, and I feel like therefore it lacked some weight. I feel like there was too little character development, and yeah, like I said, I'm not sure about the surreal aspect of the story, and I found that rather confusing. All in all, I always appreciate disability representation in books and reading own voices, but as a story on sich, I wouldn't recommend it. Let's pick my next book. Let's talk about The Dragon Keeper, or Dragon Keeper by Robin Hobb, which I finished yesterday. I'm not going to talk too much about the plot of this book because of spoilers. For those who don't know, this is part of the realm of the Elden series, which consists of 16 books, but it's subdivided into 5 trilogies, or rather 5 trilogies and 1 quartet. And this is book 1 of the Rainwild Chronicles, which is the 4th sub-series in the overarching world, and book 10 in total, if you're still following me. So yeah, too much risk for spoilers if I get into the plot, and also I feel like it's a little bit too convoluted to get into it. But yeah, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that there's at least 1 dragon involved, considering the title. I really enjoyed this, but it's not my favorite in the series so far. There is still a lot of the Robin Hobb trademarks. It has great world building, there's a great attention for detail in regards to history and like the lore, without it getting really bogged down. She's really great at character writing. Some of the characters are very morally grey, and that's something I loved in the previous books as well. She's really good at making you love or hate a character in the beginning, and then she slowly brings more nuance to them, you know, revealing them bit by bit, so that you start to feel more compassion for the characters you disliked in the beginning, and maybe your favorite characters are not as faultless as you once thought. And then also just on a sentence by sentence level, Robin Hobb's writing is really, really beautiful. I always feel like really drawn in by her writing from the first page. But yeah, I wasn't as enamored with this book as with her other books in the series so far. I think it's mostly due to a lack of plot in this book. Like there's things happening in this and I was compelled to read on, but it just feels very much like the first book in the series. We are introduced to a bunch of new characters, and it just feels a lot more like a setup for the rest of this like sub quartet, and I kind of missed like an arc for this book alone. Also, I didn't see as much of some of the characters of the previous books as I would have liked, and yeah, it just felt more like the setup of something new rather than the continuation of the story so far. So yeah, I'm very curious how this will continue. I have heard more people say that the Rainwild Chronicles is their least favorite of the sub-series, but I also know that Robin Hobb is really good at like pulling all these different threads together and weaving it all together in the end. Even if I don't see it yet, I trust that she has a plan. Okay, on to the next book. So I have two books to tell you about. First, I'm going to tell you about the next book I picked up from my shelves, which I ended up DNFing, and that was The Garden of Evening Mists by Tan Twan Eng. This is about Yun Ling. She's a Malaysian Chinese woman who was at a Japanese prisoner of war camp during the Second World War, and she becomes an apprentice to a Japanese gardener, a very renowned Japanese gardener, and her goal is to build a garden to honor her sister who died in the prison camp. So what I was hoping for from this book was a sort of beautifully written, reflective sort of novel about grief, with maybe a strong sense of nature in it, and maybe I'd learn something about Malaysian history. But I didn't really get on with this at all. It felt really contrived. I thought it was boring. It didn't seem to go anywhere. I felt the metaphors in this book were really on the nose, and I think most importantly I just didn't care. I got to about page 100 and I figured I don't care about this person's past, I don't care where she was going, which was really annoying to me, because when you would describe this character to me I would totally be interested in her story, but her voice was just so flat and so nondescript that I didn't feel like I got to know her at all. So yeah, that's why I DNF'd this book. And then for something completely different, I did read Tolkien's Letters from Father Christmas, which I borrowed from the library because I wanted to read something Christmassy. So this is a collection of letters that Tolkien wrote as Father Christmas to his children. There is over 20 years worth of letters, starting in 1920 I think, and then all the way to 1943, and in them Father Christmas basically just tells them what's been going on the North Pole, and it is just about as wholesome as you imagine it might be. Let me show you some of the letters. So you've got like the letters, you've got the letters here, and then the envelope as well, and then it's just transcribed into regular print. And then there's pictures as well. This is actually one that the polar bear drew. The polar bear is basically Santa's companion, and he comments on the letters as well. So for example, you've got like Father Christmas's handwriting here, and then the polar bear will leave little comments in the margins in his handwriting, which is adorable. And then there's pictures as well. Let me find some that were drawn by Father Christmas. Yeah, for example, here he always adds like a hand-drawn Christmas card. So yeah, it's a very beautiful book. I really loved looking at all the pictures and all the different types of handwriting, and they're really nicely detailed. Obviously all the letters are written in the interwar period, and some of the later ones during the Second World War, and that comes through in the letters in a very age-appropriate way, I think. I'm guessing a lot of the adventures that Father Christmas is writing about in his letters was a way for Tolkien to explain why the kids maybe wouldn't get everything they wanted, because I'm guessing at the times toys were scarce. But if you write a letter saying that there's been a goblin attack at Santa's workshop and a lot of toys were destroyed, well, that would explain why maybe you wouldn't get that particular train set. But then later on there's also more direct references to the war and the time they were living in, where Father Christmas would, for example, say that, you know, I'm glad you are still at the same address because so many other children are displaced, so it's harder to find everyone. Or he will mention that this year he's delivering a lot more clothes and food instead of toys because so many children don't have enough of them. So yeah, I really adore this. Let me just show you some more of the drawings because they're so lovely to look at. That is actually the drawing of the goblin attack that I just mentioned. Here's like a letter where there's a lot of small drawings and like different colored ink used. Here's a drawing where the polar bear took a bath and he fell asleep. So the bath overflowed and all the presents got wet. So yeah, a very lovely book to look through, and I would absolutely recommend picking this up around Christmas time. So yeah, we are nearing the end of the year. I have actually already started my what I think would be my last book, or actually two books, because the next book was White Tears, Brown Scars, which is a non-fiction book, and I figured I also wanted to read a fiction book, so that was Small Island by Andrea Levy. So I'm working my way through both of those, and I will check back in when I've read them. So it is now actually the first day of 2025, and I have two more books to tell you about and wrap up the month of December. I finished both of these books in the last hours of 2024. So the first book is White Tears, Brown Scars, How White Feminism Betrays Women of Color by Ruby Hamad. And this is really one of those books I want to press into everyone's hands to read. Honestly, I don't think this is a book that really taught me anything I didn't know already, but I feel like sometimes it's good to have something pointed out and to have something laid bare. And it does so in a very direct and clear and accessible way. In its core, it is about white feminism, how white feminism evolved from colonialism, and how the concerns of white women may not align with the experiences of women of colour, and how white feminism has excluded women of colour. It speaks of different harmful stereotypes that exist about women of colour and indigenous people as well, how those stereotypes came to be in history, how they've harmed women of colour and how they still are harmful, and also how white women have used these stereotypes to benefit and to benefit from and to justify their own racism. One of the main focus of the book is the idea of white tears, which is the emotional manipulation that white women deploy to shift the focus back on their distress, especially around the discussion around racism, rather than addressing the injustices faced by women of colour, and definitely avoiding the role that white feminism has in these injustices. So it's a book that calls for an intersectional view on feminism. It's not the first of its kind and it probably won't be the last, but I do think this one is especially clear in explaining what the role of white women is in particular, rather than blaming everything on the evil white man and letting white women off the hook, because they also deal with sexism. It calls out the particular privileges of white women and how we need to learn those and be aware of those, and it makes us be aware of the complexity and different forms of oppression that women of colour face, and wants us to move into a more feminist view that is generally supportive of all women. So yeah, I would highly recommend this book. I think it's an excellent read. And then the very last book I finished was Small Island by Andrea Levy. This is a book I've been wanting to read for a long time, and I don't think it disappointed me. The book starts in 1948 and we meet Hortense. She's a young woman from Jamaica. She has just arrived in London to come and live with her husband Gilbert. Gilbert has served in the RAF during the Second World War, and he is drawn to the promise of a better life in England. So he goes ahead to get things set up. He quickly discovers that what he calls the mother country is maybe not so welcoming as he has hoped. And Hortense, who is still full of dreams of a new life in England, is very disappointed to learn that her new house that she has dreamed about, is really a small rented room in a rundown house. The rooms are rented out by a woman named Queenie Bly. After the war, she was still waiting for her husband Bernard to return from his service in India. But since she hears nothing from him, she is forced to provide for herself, and she decides to rent out rooms to Jamaican people, despite of the backlash she receives from her neighbours. So we follow these four different characters, Hortense, Gilbert, Queenie and Bernard, and we get all of their perspectives. We move into the past with each of them. We learn about their history, their childhood, and we learn about their experiences during the World War, the Second World War, and then eventually we all move back into the present day. The present day being 1948 in this house in London, and how the lives of these people eventually come together. I must admit, it took me a little while to get into this novel. I thought the beginning was a bit slow, maybe a bit tedious, probably because I assumed that the book was going to be focused on the female characters. So when we first got into the background of Gilbert, it felt like a massive side tangent, but then I realized the book was going to be focused on the 4 characters rather than the 2. I felt like I got more invested in the story. It took me a little while to get into the groove of this book, but I felt like once I did, it was a really compelling read. I think it did a really good job in portraying the different struggles that each of the characters went through, and the impact that the war had on their lives, the effect that the British colonial past had on their personal beliefs and prejudices, but also how it was just such a transformative period in history, the post-war period when Britain was rebuilding, but also the beginning of the Windrush generation, you know, when a lot of people from the Caribbean were invited to come and live in Britain and encouraged to help to rebuild the country after the war. And I think the book really captures a moment in time and how the landscape was really changing at that time. So yeah, I think that's where the book really shines, in shining a light on the clashing of different cultures, on the influence of colonialism, on the internalized racism. I think that's handled very well in this book. I do think that the book may be a little bit forgettable in regards to the characters. I did feel that sometimes they were a little bit stereotyped, or rather that they very much each served a purpose in the book, like they each had a lesson to convey. Not to say that the characters weren't complex or layered. I think they were all very layered characters and all very flawed characters in one way or another, which I really enjoy, but they sometimes felt a bit like puppets on the string of the author, which I know is basically a definition of a book, but I don't know if that makes any sense. But yeah, I think as a historical fiction novel talking about a specific moment in time, it's really well done, and I'm very glad I read it. So yeah, that was the very last book I read in December. With that, I'm gonna close the reading year. This is going to be my final stack of the month. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's probably gonna get lost in all the best of 2024 videos, all the reading goal videos for 2025. I get it, that's what I'm gonna watch around this time. So yeah, if you did decide to click on this video and watch it, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Leave any thoughts and comments you have down below, and I will see you in my next video. Don't worry, that will be my favorite books of 2024. Okay, bye bye.